And Jesus is speaking to a group of people in Galilee, in the northern part of what is now Israel. Now, calling out to the whole crowd, Jesus said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. Nothing that comes from outside of someone that goes into them makes them unacceptable as a person. But what comes out of someone is what can contaminate them. Whoever has ears that can hear had better be listening." After entering a home where he was staying as a guest, his disciples asked him about this parable. Then he spoke to them in this way. "Boy, not you all too. Don't you get it? Don't you get it that anything external to someone that they might eat or drink is not what makes a person unacceptable? None of that would be going into a person's spiritual heart, but into their stomach and purged out like any food. However, what comes out of someone is what can contaminate them. For it is from within a person's heart where evil schemes are hatched, such as infidelity, sexual offenses, murder, thievery, greed, cruelty, deception, perversity, a devouring eye, spiritual hatred, narcissism, and rebellion. All such depravities which come from within someone, when they go out, they are what contaminate people." Soon after, Jesus arose and journeyed across the border to Tyre and Sidon, what is now Lebanon, to stay at another home, insisting that no one should know he was there. But it was not possible for him to avoid attention. For there was a woman who, upon hearing about Jesus, came to him for the sake of her daughter, who suffered from an evil spirit. And this woman knelt down at his feet to urgently beg him for help. However, the woman was a Greek of Syro-Phoenician ancestry. She asked that he cast out the demon from her daughter, but Jesus said to her, "Shouldn't the children of Israel be fed first? It's not right to throw their food to pet dogs." But the woman responded and said to him, "Yea, Lord, for those puppies are waiting under the table to eat the scraps those careless babies let fall." And Jesus said to her, "Your words cut to the truth. Return home. That demon is gone from your daughter." And going away, she entered her house to find the demon was gone, and her daughter resting on her bed. So again, Jesus journeyed out, going from Tyre and Sidon toward the Sea of Galilee to the east, and crossing the border into the midst of the 10 cities of the Decapolis, a region that catered to the Greco-Roman culture. But a group of local people brought a person to him who was deaf and stuttering, and they hoped Jesus would show mercy by putting his hand on this person. So Jesus took him aside away from the others, and putting his fingers in his ears and getting him to spit, and then putting his fingers on the person's tongue and looking up to heaven, he sighed. And then he said to this person, "Ephphatha, be opened." Then immediately, this person's hearing opened up, and his tongue was loosened, and he could talk coherently. Consequently, Jesus cautioned them all not to talk about this. Yet as much as he warned them, the more broadly they proclaimed it. And they were exceedingly astonished, saying, "He can do anything. He can even make deaf people hear and mute people speak." over the next few days, a vast crowd of many people had gathered there, but there was no food for them to eat. Jesus called to his disciples and said to them, I feel compassion for this multitude. They've already been here with me for 3 days, but they don't have anything to eat. If they are sent away starving, they shall collapse on the road, for some of them have come from a long way. And then the disciples answered him, saying, From where would we get any bread in this wilderness? And Jesus asked them, How many loaves do you have? Well then, they said, 7. Therefore Jesus told the multitude, Sit down on the ground. Then taking the 7 loaves of bread, Jesus gave a thanksgiving, broke the bread, and gave them to the disciples to place before the multitude, which they did here and there. And they also had a few fish, which Jesus blessed and said, Place these before them too. So they ate, and they had enough. And they collected up a surplus of fragments into 7 baskets. About 4,000 people had something to eat. And then they were sent on their way. Soon after, Jesus and his disciples climbed into a boat and sailed to Dalmanutha, which was also called Magdala. Amen. Now, there's a movement in some states legislating that the Bible be taught in public schools and the 10 Commandments be posted in classrooms. And you'd think this would be a good thing. But it would be more like forcing students to accept religious beliefs, forcing them to do this. And even the basic commandment, love God and love others as yourself, even that is forcing people to comply and conform. And you can't make somebody love you, because the moment that you do, it stops being love and becomes coercion. And the spirit of love does not cooperate with coercion. And this is like Leviticus 19. Actually, there's not so many things. There was something about what strands of thread you use. Don't use 2 kinds of thread in clothes. But there was a lot of good advice there in those, basically a retelling of the 10 Commandments. But even then, there was a frustration Jesus had with the notion of religion as something that people had to comply with and conform. And Jesus was trying to get them to think outside of the box of what religion had become, to live an abundant life. And so he was struggling with his own people, the Jewish people of Galilee and Judea, where these prohibitions were becoming inhibitions to living that authentic life. So even his disciples weren't getting it. And Jesus fortunately had this healthy practice that when life was getting up to here for him, he knew to go on a spiritual retreat. And so he left a home where he was staying as a guest to go to another home over the border in Lebanon. And he was hoping to get away, to be anonymous, and that was not going to work. When he spoke with his disciples, when they questioned him about it, and it was, what, you don't get it too. And then he enumerated the various evils that should be prohibited, bless you, that were not addressed. He named all these different evils that are hatched in a person's heart, except for one: prejudice, his own. Well, He was over the border in Syro-Phoenician territory. Now this is significant. The Greeks had invaded hundreds of years before. Alexander the Great had conquered that region and had left surrogate leaders to govern the area. And this one particular one, in between the Old Testament times and the New, and it was during that period where Antiochus IV literally tried to destroy Judaism, prohibited the worship, desecrated the temple in Jerusalem, executed people. It was a horrific experience. So there was a level of ethnic hatred between the Jews and the Greeks. And Jesus would have grown up in that culture. And so a woman who is a Greek of Syro-Phoenician ancestry comes to him for help, and she's seeking him to exorcise an evil spirit from her daughter. Okay, first of all, Jesus was frustrated with his own people. Then here's this Greek woman that comes to him, this people who is an enemy of his own people, and she asks him to do an exorcism. And Jesus was trying to separate himself, to distance himself from this kind of work. He'd gotten in trouble before because these people who were freed of their demons were saying, "You are the Son of God." And this is why he had those 12 disciples, to be his official spokesman, for them to be his witness, and not for people to associate him with these exorcisms. And so this frustration was built up for him, and she becomes his lightning rod. And he uses an epithet, which would seem to be uncharacteristic of Jesus. But the Greek woman, she gave it right back to him. And she comes back to him in a way of saying, "Yes, Lord, what you're saying is true. But even we who are not Jewish know to come to you, and we'll accept whatever you give us." And seeing that kind of faith, Jesus was confronted with his own prejudice and changed, instantly changed. Now, this kind of goes against our notion of Jesus being omniscient and he's always choosing to do the right thing. He did the right thing. He's modeled for us to be able to change our hearts and minds when we're confronted with the truth. We believe that Jesus came from above. But if you remember, well, I'll come back to that in just a bit. And so he changed. Well, the woman goes home, and her daughter is freed from that evil spirit. Ethical cleansing can easily turn into ethnic cleansing. The exclusiveness of cultural rules. Holiness is really being about separateness. Even this kind of notion can be corrupted. But the Greek woman challenged Jesus right back, and he recognized his fault and changed. Once again, Jesus crossed a border to get away, this time into Greco-Roman territory, the 10 cities of the Decapolis, and out in the wilderness this time, not in a home. Some of the people there somehow find him out and ask him to heal a person who is deaf and mute. And Jesus takes the person off to the side and does this elaborate procedure to heal this person. And what is suggested here is that Jesus would tailor his healing for the individual and what they needed. It's a visitation. And Jesus takes the person off to the side, and he does this elaborate gestures, and he says, "Ephphatha, be opened." And that's, in a way of thinking, that's almost a parable for what's happened for him. I remember talking with a church secretary about this, and she introduced this idea that this opened him up to the wider world. This was the beginning of him now, not just being there for the Jewish people, but also for the non-Jewish people, the Gentiles, the Arabic, Roman, Greek people. That this was now, he was opening himself up to a wider ministry. Well, there was even more to discover with this. Now, it says that 4,000 Greco-Roman people sought to be with Jesus. But why so many and so quickly? And I have a theory about this. They must have already known who Jesus was and what he could do. Was it that man who had been possessed with the legion of demons whom Jesus did not allow to go with him? And as I said before, he was trying to distance himself from that kind of thing. But as it says at the end of that story, and also in the Gospel of Mark, it says, he went home, and in time he went forth and proclaimed throughout the 10 cities of the Decapolis about what Jesus had done for him. And everyone everywhere was amazed and surprised with joy. Can we assume that it was the work of that individual who reached so many people that they already knew who Jesus of Nazareth was and what he was capable of doing? Why so many thousands of people sought him out in a wilderness to be with him. Now, if that particular person, if you remember, when the demons left him, they went into a herd of pigs. 2,000 of them were drowned in the waters. That man had 2,000 pigs worth of pain, and symbolized what happens when we don't know what to do with that energy, that negative, when it becomes negative. Energy is neither negative or positive, good or evil. But if we don't do something with that energy, if it festers in us, well, we see the effect of it. For Jesus, when he learned of the death of John the Baptist, he goes off by himself. He seeks to be alone to pray. Instead, 5,000 people have followed after him, and he has compassion for them. He heals them and feeds them. He worked off the energy in him by doing something positive to transfer that energy into feeding 5,000 people. So that was a way to quantify that pain. And I suspect that 4,000 people being fed by Jesus was a way he worked off that frustration of somehow his folks, the Jewish people, not getting it. Somehow it'll work out. But here the people who were non-Jewish were there for him to receive, to be fed by him. And also that man who had been possessed, the same thing. That the fruit of his work was that 4,000 people of his country were fed. We can only speculate about the backstory of that man who had been possessed and what became of him. I suspect it would follow in what I spoke to you about the Beatitudes, the countermyth. And he is lost to anonymity. But we know that those who are persecuted for the sake of justice, nevertheless, for them, the beloved community is also there for them. Now let me come back to that Greek woman one more time. And if you remember the very first set of stories that I told you about, the role that Mary played. Jesus, the spirit of love, comes from above, but Jesus was grounded. The center of gravity was being raised as a good Jew, as an observant Jew, as one who was raised in the prophetic tradition. And that came from Mary. And the evidence of that was the Magnificat. But also remember that when it came time, when Jesus was rejected by his own folks in his own synagogue in Nazareth, they almost killed him for what he said. for taking a stand on the prophetic tradition. But it was at that wedding in Cana when Mary said to him, "They have no wine." And though we don't know what else she might have said, it was as if she said, "You can do something about this. I believe in you. Go for it." Think of that person who stood for you in your time of doubt and said, "I believe in you. You can do this." In the same way, this Greek woman had challenged Jesus. Now Jesus was ready. He was ready to go to Jerusalem. And the next step was to make sure that the disciples would get it, that he would prepare them to go forth. And in time, he would send out the 72. And he would send them out to do the things that he had been doing. And there are 3 things specifically: to drive out the evil spirits of fear, deception, and hatred, to heal people in their body, mind, and spirit, and to plant the seeds of beloved community, God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, the beloved community that is yet possible. Friends, let us go forth from here. Know your narrative of belief so that you can listen with patience, question civilly, and stay engaged. Amen.